I am not a very creative person. I have had a lot of story ideas which open in some kind of nondescript facility or parking garage where two people are having a fight, because those are the places in contemporary society which come to mind first when you think of public places that are out of sight. So many scenes are set in places like this that it's really hard to remember any specific ones unless they're exceptionally good, like the writing Bean OVA. Do-Da-Da-Da relied on places like this a lot, and the scene that introduced Celti in the first episode is probably one of the most memorable examples in anime just for the way that it plays out in animation. But when I tried to read the light novel a few years later, the presentation of this scene was so much more flat and generic that I kinda lost interest in reading it. Koroshi Ai, translating literally to killer love, or I guess love of kill, opens with the guy killing some people in a nondescript facility, and then mounting this girl that seems to be trying to assassinate him and asking her name before telling her that he's trying to flirt with her because he doesn't meet a lot of girls. I thought pretty much immediately that this seemed like something an idiot like me would have come up with back in my teens when I was really into shows like Bakano and Darker Than Black about goofy criminals and crime fighters with personality disorders and superpowers wreaking havoc in the city. Of course, those examples all represent the best of the genre, while at a glance, Koroshi Ai looks like any of the other forgettable offspring of those influences. There's a guy in this show who has no mouth, but the joke is that he's obnoxious and never shuts the fuck up, which I'm only upset about because I'm exactly as annoying as this character in real life. There's an odd kind of unpredictability to the early part of a show like this, where the characters just act so inhuman and unrelatable that you really can't tell what they're gonna do or where the show's going until you have a sense of what logic these assholes are operating under. I promised myself I wouldn't describe a show's writing as autistic anymore, so I won't. So basically, the first episode of this show establishes our main character as a Pepe Le Pew-esque sex pest trying to get into the pants of this blonde girl, because apparently she's the only person that he doesn't think smells like shit. She's kind of like following along with it out of trying to understand his motivations because she knows he's a criminal. It's not really clear how she actually feels about him because her decision making is really hard to follow. Based on the first episode, I had absolutely no fucking clue who this show was for. It was labeled on the site I was watching it on as Josei Action Romance, so I guess it's for me? But I'm just sitting here like, these are possibly the least likable characters I think I've ever seen. By episode 3, I've watched a whole bunch of people get shot to death in between lightly toned, flirtatious slice-of-life scenes, and never once had any idea why. It just seems to be a thing these characters do, is end up in life-threatening gunfights all the time. Like, I get that the main guy is being pursued, but the show doesn't really specify individually if the people he's killing are, like, the ones who are after him, why they're after him, to what end is he killing them. It feels like this disconnected blur of gun violence, insanely awkward courtship, characters wondering what one another are up to, and endless recap footage that still doesn't make me feel like I totally follow what's going on in the plot. This show does something I can't stand in manga adaptations, which is when you have a soundtrack that's been crafted to account for each tone that the story dips into, but then the scenes that use that music are timed around the music in a way that makes the dialogue feel awkwardly paced to fill in the length of the scene. It's really hard to put the rhythm that this creates into words, but you can really feel it when an adaptation does it poorly, because it creates this kind of hazy feeling where the music starts carrying the weight of the experience, and usually can't because it's boring and generic. In episode 4, the main girl tries to stun a guy, and it doesn't work because, as he puts it, his nerve endings are fried from the drug he used to take. I want to know where I could get the hookup on this drug. Later on, the main guy shoots him a bunch of times. He's like, "You stood through that hail of bullets. You must have fried your nerve endings." Like it's a thing people do on purpose for superpowers. After our girl gets knocked out, we learn her backstory about how her parents were killed and she was adopted by the police chief and his wife who had worked her case and taken care of her throughout. Just from the way that this police guy stoically strides right past the people telling him he's not supposed to get involved with the kid or to go into certain rooms, etc., he reminded me a lot of Special Agent Gibbs from NCIS. Drugman turns out to be a guy from the main character's past who I guess took him in off the streets when he was an addict and gave him a home amid some gang, though it's yet unclear in what way he betrayed that gang to put him on the run. In any case, by this point we can assume the truth that was obvious from the start, that our main character is probably just a hero who's only been killing bad guys all along, and that it was never wrong of him to be so pushy because the girl is just going to end up falling for him anyways. Now, officially, things are predictable. Episode 6 recaps previous events while properly laying out an explanation of exactly what's going on, explaining that the main guy is an assassin of unknown origin who caused some huge disturbance in the criminal underworld that led to a bunch of chaos and put him on the run, while the girl works for an organization that they never want to explain what the hell it is exactly, or why this kid has no mouth, or characterizing her boss beyond his vague concern for what she might be up to at all. It feels like this show was devised specifically to obfuscate how generic it really is for as long as it can, by giving the viewer very little to go on until they find out that everything's as straightforward as it could possibly be. Is this show aimed at extremely guarded women looking for an insanely hyperactive, obnoxious asshole to drag them through life or something? For me, the characters both swing too wide on the pendulum for me to like them. Chateau is too straight-faced and plain for me to relate to or think is fun to watch, and Song is over-the-top pushy and ridiculous to an extent I would never ever want to be around. In a general way, I can see what's appealing about aspects of each of their personalities, but they're just so intense and unnuanced that it's grating to have to spend a lot of time with them. In this way, they are somehow the opposite of the couple from My Dress-Up Darling, because unlike that couple, they have no chemistry, and this show is at its most draining when the two of them interact. In episode 7, Chateau realizes that people around her are innately in danger for some reason she doesn't know, and decides to just kill herself. So Song rescues her, and then decides to strangle her to the point of unconsciousness to show her how much she actually instinctively does not want to die. I don't think I need to point out how toxically fucking preposterous that is, but at least it's starting to dip into the realm of like 50 Shades of Grey-esque kink depravity that can kind of justify its existence to someone, maybe. I know any aspect of this show that I consider edgy and cringeworthy, from the senseless and cheap violence to the blunt dialogue to the unappealing romance, is likely to be exactly the stuff that makes the show enjoyable to the people who like it, and more power to you if you're one of them. Koroshi Ai is actually pretty easily recommendable to a few small categories of people that I know exist. Not unlike My Dress-Up Darling, it should appeal most strongly to anyone that either wants to be or fuck one or both of the main characters. Also, to anyone who generally needs a certain dose of edgy violence to get them to pay attention to a series at all, but wouldn't mind seeing a romance subplot in what is otherwise a bunch of increasingly cooler looking gangster dudes murdering one another over past drama. I also know that anime has a lot of potential in helping different people to overcome specific traumas, or to contextualize aspects of their own personalities, and I could definitely see this show clicking with some people in that way as well. Though for me, it just felt like seeing the absolute worst fringes of my own personality turned into characters and then pushed to edgy and violent extremes without any sense of self-awareness, which is just very annoying. At least I can say that the show has a certain sincerity that I think could endear it to certain audiences who maybe aren't as into the postmodern undercurrents and complex lore of a Durarara or a Fate Stay Night or something. Even though this show has a character named Chateau Dankworth, it really wasn't worthy of such a dank name. In the end, we learn that the main characters were predictably connected by some traumatic past event all along, which isn't really exciting enough to be worth describing in detail. If you've made it far enough into Attack on Titan to see Eren Yeager's backstory, then you've seen a more interesting version of a similar scenario. And also, you're watching what will eventually become one of the better anime of the decade. Love of Kill, however, I don't expect to remember that I've seen when I wake up tomorrow. I'm giving this one a 3 out of 10. I've been Trixie the Golden Witch. Subscribe to goldenwitch.substack.com for more of my writing and exclusive podcasts, or support me on patreon.com/goldenwitchfire, and find me at goldenwitchfire on all social medias and payment platforms. Thanks again for watching, and never forget, anime forever.